My name is Donna Hargreaves, and for most of my life, silence was the only language I was allowed to speak. At every family table, my father's voice filled the room like a command. Sharp, certain, final. When he spoke, I disappeared. When he looked at me, it was never to see me, only to measure how well I obeyed. Sit there and smile, Donna. That was his way of saying, don't remind anyone you exist. I tried, God knows I tried, to earn a place in his world. I bit my tongue, swallowed pride, and called it love. But love shouldn't feel like walking on glass just to keep the peace. Years of being small for his comfort hollowed me out, until one day, something inside me just stopped shrinking. That night, watching him boast to a room that pretended I wasn't there, I felt a calm I couldn't name. Not anger, not revenge, just a quiet knowing that his world, the one built on my silence, was about to crack. He still thought I would smile and stay quiet. He had no idea what was coming next. The light in the Norfolk Officers' Club that night was a soft, flattering gold, bright enough to honor heroes, dim enough to hide the cracks in pride. My father stood at the center of it all, chest full of medals, surrounded by men who still called him captain out of habit. They spoke of loyalty, of sacrifice, of legacy. No one spoke of me. I sat at the far end of the table, in a black dress that didn't belong in a room full of uniforms. The clinking of glasses carried like distant applause for someone else's story. My mother's eyes stayed fixed on the linen napkin in her lap. When I rose halfway to offer congratulations, my father's voice cut through the hum, low, deliberate, meant only for me. Sit there and smile. Tonight isn't about you. The laughter that followed was effortless, rehearsed. I smiled too, because that's what he wanted. A quiet, polished daughter who knew how to stay out of the frame. Across the table, Kyle basked in their praise. A young officer, they said, just like his father. My father's shoulders straightened as he replied that he'd raised a man who understood that honor is the only thing worth keeping. The words landed sharp and clean, carving a familiar hollow inside me. I didn't need him to say it aloud. I was never part of that honor. The metal gleamed beneath the chandelier, a reflection of everything I wasn't. For a moment, I almost wished he'd look my way and see something worth his pride. But that wish died quietly, the way most of mine had. I left before dessert, the practiced smile still fixed in place. It was the only thing about me he'd ever approved of. Yet as the door closed behind me, I felt something shift, small, certain, and final. One day, he'd have to say my name, and when he did, it wouldn't be out of pity. I still remember the sound of rain the night I left home. It wasn't violent, just steady, the kind that fills every silence you wish someone would break. I was 19, holding a scholarship letter from MIT, the ink still sharp, still smelling like hope. My father had already arranged my admission to the Naval Academy, my future, written in his hand before I had a chance to hold the pen. When I told him I wouldn't go, his face hardened into something unrecognizable. The living room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with the kind of quiet that always came before his judgment. His words were slow, measured, almost ceremonial. If you walk away from the Navy, you walk away from this family. My mother stood near the fireplace, her lips trembling, eyes fixed on the floor as if she could avoid choosing sides. I waited for her to speak, to tell him I was still his daughter. Instead, she whispered, "Go, Donna." I remember the color of the light, pale gold from the old lamp, the sound of my bag's zipper, the smell of wet pavement waiting outside. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I walked out into the rain, the door closing softly behind me like a final salute. I carried one photograph with me, the three of us in front of the naval base, my father's arm around my shoulders, his smile wide, proud, certain. He'd said that day, "A Hargreaves never turns his back on honor." I kept that picture for years, though I stopped believing the words printed across his grin. 15 years later, the photo's edges were frayed, its colors faded. I'd lived a lifetime since that night, moved from dorm rooms to offices, built a name behind closed doors, learned to exist without needing to be seen. Then, one Monday morning in December, my inbox flashed with a new message. Invitation. Project Orion. Systems demonstration. Norfolk Officers' Hall. For a long time, I just stared at the screen. Norfolk Officers' Hall, the same place where I'd once been told to sit down and be quiet, to disappear for the sake of decorum. Now, the signature at the bottom of the invitation bore my name. Scrolling down the program list, I froze. Keynote speaker, Robert Hargreaves, senior military consultant. Program director, Colonel Weston, retired Navy intelligence. And right beneath both, Donna Hargreaves, chief engineer. It felt unreal, symmetrical almost, the past and present facing each other in black letters on a white screen. Fate didn't send invitations often, but when it did, it chose the perfect battlefield. The day I returned to Norfolk, the sky was the same dull gray I remembered from my childhood. Wind rolled in from the bay, carrying salt and the faint hum of the docks. The officers' hall stood unchanged. White pillars, immaculate steps, and a flag bending stubbornly against the cold air. I stood there for a moment, the chill cutting through my coat, wondering if the ghosts inside would still recognize me. From down the corridor came a voice I knew too well, firm, confident, crafted for authority. Orion will change the face of cyber warfare, it said. I am honored to serve as a consultant for this remarkable program. The sound rooted me to the spot. My father, speaking about my creation as if it were his. I'd written every line of Orion's code, designed its architecture, and chosen its name because it meant light that never loses its way. I stepped through the doorway. He turned mid-sentence, surprise flickering across his features before tightening into disapproval. What are you doing here? I met his eyes. I was invited. By who? Colonel Weston appeared behind me, tall and calm, his presence carrying quiet authority. He extended his hand toward me with a nod. Glad you made it, Chief. The room fell silent. My father's expression twisted in confusion at the word chief, as if the title didn't belong in my direction. To him, it was a term reserved for men, for soldiers, for people he understood. He didn't realize it wasn't just a courtesy, it was recognition. Weston's eyes met mine briefly. He knew everything, my position, my call sign, the truth behind the code, but he said nothing, just offered a faint, knowing smile that said, let them see for themselves. I nodded. The demonstration was tomorrow, for everyone else. It was about technology and defense systems. But for me, it was something far more personal. Tomorrow, the man who'd erased me from his world would have to face what he'd built without knowing it, me. The morning before the launch, I arrived before anyone else. The hum of the servers was steady, rhythmic, almost comforting. I moved through the lab, checking systems, scanning logs, until I spotted a small transmission delay. Tiny, but enough to cause trouble if left alone. I was tracing it when a voice, sharp and familiar, broke the quiet. I knew it. They'll let anyone in here these days. I turned. My father stood in the doorway, arms crossed, the same authority that used to fill every room of my childhood. I work here, I said. Work here? In this sector? You realize this is top security clearance? I met his eyes. I helped write it. He smirked, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Don't overstate yourself. You're a technician, nothing more. Honor isn't earned by typing on a keyboard, Donna. It's earned by those willing to bleed for it. The words cut deep, but no longer surprised me. I'd heard versions of them all my life. I took a breath. Honor has more than one way of being kept. Across the hall, I noticed Colonel Weston watching through the glass. He said nothing, just observed, as though measuring the distance between two generations. Kyle appeared a moment later, his voice strained. Dad, stop. She's part of the Orion team, my superiors said so. Robert shot him a glare. Don't defend someone who doesn't understand service. The honor of this family doesn't rest with her. That broke something quiet inside me. Not rage, just resignation. I'd spent years chasing his approval, only to realize he'd built a world where I'd never belong. I'll make sure not to shame you, I said softly, and left. Weston met me in the corridor. You all right? I've been hearing that speech since I was 19. He gave a small smile. Tomorrow, he'll learn honor comes in more than one form. That night, I stayed late in the dim glow of the monitors. The code streamed endlessly. green letters painting my reflection across the glass. Sit there and smile. His voice whispered from memory. Not anymore, I whispered back. The hall was full the next morning. Officers, officials, journalists. I sat with the technicians, away from the medals and rank. My father opened the ceremony, his tone confident and practiced. Project Orion, he said, represents the perfect union of discipline and innovation. I'm proud to have advised this team. Applause followed. Weston, seated beside him, didn't move. Then the lights flickered. The main display blinked twice. Then everything went black. The siren wailed. Panic rippled through the room. I recognized the error immediately. It was buried inside a failsafe only I could access. Weston stood, his voice clear over the alarm. Call the chief engineer. Who's that? Someone asked. Donna Hargreaves, he said. Every head turned. My father's face froze. No, he whispered. She's just support staff. Weston's voice rose. Chief Engineer Hargreaves, the stage is yours. I walked forward through the silence, climbed onto the stage, and began typing. System reboot initiated. Firewall restored. Security protocol reactivated. 15 seconds later, the screens blazed back to life. The Orion emblem glowed bright across the room. Applause erupted. Weston leaned toward the mic. Good work. Spectre? The applause died instantly. The word hung in the air. Spectre. The anonymous operative who'd stopped the Navy's cyber attack 3 years earlier. My father's color drained. Since when? He mouthed. Since the day you stopped believing I could, I said quietly. Later. I heard him plead with Weston in the corridor. Keep it quiet, no one needs to know. Weston's reply was calm. The truth always finds a way. And I knew then. Tomorrow would change everything. After the ceremony, I thought the storm had passed, but my father had never known how to live without control. For him, honor wasn't something you earned. It was something you protected, even if it meant hiding the truth. That night, as I walked past Colonel Weston's office, I heard his voice through the half-closed door. She shouldn't appear before the press, he said sharply. What will people think if they find out the chief engineer of Orion is my daughter? Weston's calm reply followed. I don't see a problem with that. You don't understand, Robert continued. My family has always served in uniform. She chose another path. I don't want anyone thinking I helped her. My hands curled into fists. He wasn't ashamed of me. He was ashamed of what people might think. His honor had always been a mirror, fragile and dependent on reflection. I stepped inside. You don't have to worry, I said. I don't need your name to exist. He turned. Voice cold. You're damaging this family's image, Donna. No. I'm giving it back the truth. Weston's tone cut the air. The truth deserves to be seen, Robert, and she's earned that right. My father left without another word. But the next morning, Weston discovered he had sent an email asking the committee to remove my name from the leadership list before the official announcement. When I learned of it later, I didn't even feel anger. Just a hollow, quiet exhaustion. 15 years ago, he threw me out of his house. Now, he wanted to erase me again. Weston never told me he knew. He only smiled faintly, as if waiting for something he had already planned. The following morning, every senior officer gathered in the testing hall for the final performance review. My father arrived in full uniform, medals bright under the lights, his expression carved from stone. I looked at him and saw a man clutching power that no longer belonged to him. It's going to be a long day, I said softly. You think you understand honor? He replied. I think I'm about to, I said. The hall was filled with rows of officers. The flag hung center stage. Weston stepped up to the podium, his voice carrying steady authority. Before we begin the Orion demonstration, he said, I want to recognize the engineering team responsible for the Navy's strongest defense network to date. He began reading names. Raven, Ironhawk, Viper. Each met with applause. Then he paused, glanced briefly in my direction, and finally, Spectre. Chief Engineer. Lead on Project Orion. The entire room froze. Spectre. The code name from the classified files 3 years ago. The one credited with preventing a foreign cyber attack. Weston's voice was firm. Spectre, known to us as Donna Hargreaves, safeguarded the Navy's data systems in 2020. Today, she's here with us. The room erupted. Some clapped, some stared. My father's face went pale. A young officer leaned toward him. Sir, you were honored for responding to that breach. If she stopped it first, Robert's jaw locked. Weston continued before he could answer. Sometimes honor isn't earned through rank, but through doing what's right when no one's watching. I stood. The applause grew, echoing across the hall. Officers came forward, shaking my hand. My father looked at me, the realization dawning slowly, painfully. Spectre, that was you? He whispered. I nodded, and I was proud, even when you weren't. Weston ended the ceremony with quiet finality. When they say your name, Donna, remember, it isn't a favor. It's justice. My father turned and walked out without a word. No command, no smile, just silence. And for the first time, that silence felt like victory. After the ceremony, I walked down the empty corridor of the officers' hall. The lights above hummed softly, reflecting off the marble floor like a pale river. Behind me, footsteps echoed, slow, uneven. Donna! My father's voice broke the silence. I didn't turn. I didn't know, he said. If you had what? I faced him. Been proud? Or hidden me deeper so no one would know? He looked older somehow, his voice rough. I only wanted to protect the family's honor. No. You wanted to protect how people saw you. The air between us tightened. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I was wrong, he said finally. I didn't think you could carry something like that. I carried it because you never believed I could. My tone stayed calm, but my chest ached. I learned to sit still and smile, just like you taught me. But today, I chose to stand and speak. He said nothing. Only his shoulders moved, barely, like something inside him cracked. You don't need my forgiveness, I said quietly. Just don't teach silence again. I walked away, leaving him under the fading light, his medals gleaming, his pride gone. That night, Weston asked me to meet him at the docks. The air was sharp with salt, and the sea carried the faint hum of engines from ships anchored offshore. He stood by the railing, still in uniform, but without his cap, his gray hair stirring in the wind. I'm guessing he talked to you, he said. He did. And what did you tell him? That I don't need forgiveness. A quiet smile touched his face. You remind me of myself once. I used to think honor was something others had to give you, until I learned it's what you keep when the world turns away. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was the declassified report from the cyber attack 3 years ago. At the bottom, in black ink, were the words, Lead Analyst, Spectre, Donna Hargreaves. Verified and acknowledged by Colonel Weston. I signed it, he said. But you're the one who saved the system. You have the right to make it public. I won't. I said. The people who matter already know. The rest doesn't. He looked out toward the dark horizon. I served under your father once. In Iraq. He saved my life during an ambush. That's why today, I wanted to give the Hargreaves name back its real honor. Not his, yours. We stood in silence, the wind pulling at our sleeves. The water shimmered faintly beneath the moon. I used to think being named meant I existed. I murmured. Now you know, Weston said. When they say your name, it isn't glory, it's justice. The sea was calm, the night endless. I watched the anchored ships drift like quiet ghosts and realized Spectre had never been my call sign. It was the shadow of silence I had carried all my life. The next morning, I returned to the base to finalize the handover for Project Orion. Kyle met me at the gate, his uniform crisp, his face quieter than usual. Dad's home, he said. He hasn't said much, but he read the entire report from the cyber attack. He knows. Is he all right? I asked. Not really, Kyle admitted. But I think, for the first time, his silence comes from respect, not anger. He handed me an envelope. Inside was the old photograph, me, my father, and my mother standing in front of the base. On the back, written in trembling ink, were the words, I was wrong. You never left the family. You led it forward. I didn't cry. I just brushed my fingers over the picture, as if touching something that had finally healed. When Kyle left, I walked down to the pier, the sunlight slowly spreading across the water. My phone buzzed with a message from him. "Spectre, I'm proud of you." I smiled. A real one. Unordered. Unperformed. I unclipped the Spectre badge from my jacket and placed it in a glass case, not to hide it, but to remember that sometimes we must become ghosts before we're seen in the light. The ship horns echoed in the distance as dawn streaked the sky, silver. "Honor," I whispered, "isn't my father's name. It's how you live when no one believes in you." And as I walked away from the officers' hall, I didn't sit or smile on command. I walked tall, with a smile that belonged only to me, the smile no one ordered.